We're live.
Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Goyer, and I'm really excited to be with you today. And thank you for joining us for today's Great Challenges live event. This is part of the Great Challenges program sponsored by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. I am really happy to be here moderating today's discussion, which will run for about an hour. As by way of background, I am a family caregiver. First and foremost, I have been a longtime caregiver for both my mother and father. My mother just passed on 2 weeks ago, and my father has Alzheimer's dementia, and we live together, and I moved across the country to be with them in Arizona and take care of them. I serve also as AARP's family and caregiving expert. The goal of the Great Challenges program is to look at the most complex problems in health and medicine. These are issues that can't be solved by one simple cure. There's not a real quick fix for many of the topics that are being approached in Great Challenges program. Today, we are going to jump into the race to find answers around a very important topic, very near and dear to my heart as well, and that is dementia. November is coming up tomorrow, and happy Halloween, by the way, to everyone. November is National Alzheimer's Awareness Month, and it also happens to be National Caregiving Month. So this is a really important aspect. I know at AARP we're gearing up for some great things in November. I just wrote a book for juggling work and caregiving that's going to be launching. AARP also has some new research out about caregivers, and we have a new Ad Council campaign launching. So it's a really hot topic for us and for many of our organizations. We are going to be taking questions from viewers today on social media. So if you have questions, please just tag your questions on Twitter or Facebook with the Great Challenges hashtag. Now, let me introduce our team members and guests. Guy Eakin is a Great Challenges team member, and he is the Vice President of Scientific Affairs at the Bright Focus Foundation. Hey, Guy.
How are you doing? Thanks for inviting us.
Diana Shinneman is the Director for Scientific Affairs at the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation.
Hi,
Diana.
happy to be here.
And Patricia Carter is an associate at Booz Allen Hamilton, and she and I have a lot in common in that she was a longtime caregiver for both of her parents. Hi, Patricia.
Hi.
Welcome to all of you. So let's jump into some questions. I'm going to start with Diana. This year has presented a lot of new research, new research findings related to Alzheimer's and dementia, not the least of which is the BRAIN initiative that was announced this spring. Now, what do you think, you and your colleagues at ADDF, I'm sure, have been watching this and are excited about aspects of it. What most excites you about it?
Well, I think it's great that the brain is getting so much attention and focus. There's so much that we don't know about the brain and about disease, and I think beginning to understand the brain in its normal state will really help to influence disease research. And I think there's a lot that will hopefully apply to Alzheimer's treatment development and discovery that we'll be able to learn.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people are really excited about moving forward. Guy, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you think about the complexity of the brain, you're talking about over a quadrillion different interactions that are happening in the brain. That's more stars than we have in our Milky Way, right? So we really are talking about an Apollo mission or even more complicated level, endeavor for our nation to set off on this. And I think it's a great goal for the neurosciences community. To extend that into, of course, other areas of the body, other areas of the nervous system would be a great follow-up. But where our hats are off to the administration for tackling a really, really tough challenge.
Yes, it really seems like a good step forward. Guy, while you're on, I want to ask you another question. At Bright Focus,
Sure.
You have a lot of activity going on a lot of topics, I know. But one of the things we're really interested in is the 2013 Global Neurodiscovery Challenge. And that is exploring the differences in Alzheimer's disease in men and women. Tell us a little bit about that. What are you excited about? What do you better hope to understand through that initiative?
Yeah, it's a really great partnership that we've had through a group called the 21st Century Brain Trust, which consists of our organization, the Us Against Alzheimer's, and the Jeffrey Bean Gives Back Foundation. And the challenge that's been put out is about sex differences in Alzheimer's disease. So we know that women, even if you control for the fact that women live longer than men, they're at a heightened risk for Alzheimer's disease relative to male counterparts. So why is that? And we have some basic knowledge about what molecularly is going on, but we looked at it as an opportunity to get public engagement in science and to get scientists engaged in public databases. And so it's really become very much a data mining operation to go out into public databases and see what we can tease out of complex systems around sex differences. Now, from the public side, and I think this part's right up TEDMED's alley, from the public side, one thing we're doing is we've taken our applications, and as a part of this coalition, we vetted them down to 3 finalists that are going to be announced here shortly. And we're asking the public to express their interest, and you can actually be part of the judging of these awards. So there'll be 3 finalists, and the voting is going to begin tomorrow. So if you were to go to brightfocus.org, all one word, /vote, you'd actually have the opportunity to pick what research you think is most informative and will be most instrumental for understanding some of these larger questions that mean so much to us in terms of our own risk for the disease.
What a neat opportunity for people to really get involved directly in the research and everything that's going on. Thank you, Guy, for sharing that. We have Absolutely. A siren in someone's background if you want to mute your, your sound. There we go. Let's move on. I wanted to ask Patricia a question. All of this talk about research and the future, again, it means something very different to you and I who have been or are caregivers of people who have dementia. You spent 10 years caring for your mother with dementia before she passed. When you hear about these discoveries and advancements in research, what really gives you the most hope? And I say that again from a practical viewpoint as a caregiver.
Sure. There's a lot of exciting things going on, and there's a lot of exciting things that you could link into, but what I link into and what gives me the most promise is that there'll be early identification of dementia and Alzheimer's disease, and that there'll be increasing ways that we will know how to identify who is going to go down that journey of having dementia, because the earlier you know, the better prepared you could be for the journey, like you could for any journey. So the diagnostic end of it is particularly of interest to me, having lived with it.
And I think about it all the time.
Yeah, and my mom was identified pretty early, so I did really go through a spectrum of stages of dementia with her, and that was, it was helpful to know because I could be prepared. And preparation is one of the tools that caregivers need as they go through their journey.
Absolutely, so. I can certainly identify with that as well. As my dad has been treated for Alzheimer's for many years now, and he, I think it has helped us a lot knowing that and doing some of the preventive things that we can. On that note, we have a question from Brett Jason Whitney on Twitter. He says, I have inherited a gene that causes Alzheimer's. When will we see an FDA-approved PET or PIB scan that shows the plaques? Diana, you want to take that one?
Sure. Well, we actually have 2 FDA-approved PET imaging brain scans now for Alzheimer's disease that are approved by the FDA. They're available. They may not be reimbursed by your insurance, but you can get a brain imaging test today, and I think that's very exciting. It has implications for individuals who want to know more about their individual risk of developing Alzheimer's disease, but it also has huge implications for clinical trials and for drug development, and I think that's really exciting because biomarkers are really revolutionizing the way that we're conducting clinical trials now. We actually found that using these amyloid plaque brain imaging tests, that up to 30% of people who are in clinical trials for Alzheimer's disease don't actually have the plaques and don't actually have the disease. So you can imagine how much variability that causes in the clinical trial results. So these biomarkers are enabling us to choose the right patients for clinical trials so that they're more homogeneous and less noise in the results. And it's also enabling us to diagnose people earlier so that we can do prevention trials. Because we know now that people develop amyloid plaques 10 years before they develop the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. And now there's a lot of very exciting clinical trials that are in development that are targeting those pre-symptomatic people.
I'd add on to that the biomarkers that we have are very encouraging. Diana, intimated that insurance coverage may not be happening right now. We've had some disappointing setbacks from Medicare on a decision of whether or not to cover one in particular. But a lot of these are based around medical decisions, and the opinion is that there isn't a medical necessity for having these biomarkers, since we don't have disease-modifying therapies and we're not going to cure the disease, so does it matter if you know it? I think one of the things that the TEDMED community can be discussing is, do we just need a medical reason for knowing whether or not we're at risk for these diseases or even have these diseases? Aren't there other things that are important to our lives that we can be using that information towards? And I can think, for instance, for family planning, getting our legal affairs in order, getting power of attorney set up, having my own ability to let my preferences be known at a time when I can make my preferences known, I think is an important consideration when we're facing such a incredibly prevalent and incredibly destructive disease.
It's a really good point, Guy. I think having family conversations around these things is really important. And I know for caregivers, it's really a key issue. We had a question from the Alzheimer's Prevention Initiative asking on Twitter, how would you suggest people get involved in Alzheimer's prevention research? You've already mentioned a few things. Patricia, do you have anything to add to that?
I would throw that back to the other panelists, actually, for the research portion.
Well, there is the Banner Health Alzheimer's Prevention Initiative, where you can sign up and register to be a part of clinical trials or to become aware of clinical trials in the future. The Alzheimer's Association also has Trial Match to learn about clinical trials. So those are some resources, and the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation is also developing a prevention initiative where there'll be more information on what you can do lifestyle-wise for prevention.
Go ahead. Did you want to say something, Guy?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're looking for just your ability to survey all the clinical trials that are going on, really encourage people in the U.S. to look at clinicaltrials.gov and put in the keywords for Alzheimer's disease, and it'll tell you where almost anything is going on right now. Trial Match that Diana mentioned is more of a concierge version of clinicaltrials.gov. People will walk you through what your inclusion might be, what trials you'd be eligible for. But I'd like to make the point, too, that you don't have to have Alzheimer's disease to participate in clinical trials. We need people who are cognitively intact. We need young people as well. Diana's group and our group are partnering to fund a program that's actually looking at actually quite young subjects, just to ask the question of whether or not a drug can modify the amyloid beta levels in these patients. So don't assume that you can't participate in clinical trials just because of age or your disease status.
Yes, I know here in Phoenix, the Banner Memory Care program at Banner Hospital has a special program to get caregivers involved in some of the registering people and that sort of thing. So you can also sometimes reach out to your local programs, and they can help you get hooked up with the research that's going on.
And I think one final way we might encourage people is the gift of their tissue. After, in the same way that we fill out organ donation cards, there are local brain banks in many of our areas, and being able to give healthy or diseased tissue to those brain banks is just is just catalytic. I mean, it just helps so much on the research side to have that available tissue, so that we're studying real human beings and not having to make guesses about what's happening based on projections in animals or in computation.
I'm glad you brought that up, Guy. Both of my parents have said that they want their bodies donated to science, and we did that with my mother. Both my parents are educators, and they felt very strongly that this is something that could continue contributing. So I encourage people to consider that. As a family member, it was actually good. It felt like one more gift that my mom was giving to the world.
It's an incredible gift, and thank you for making that part of your family.
Mm-hmm. You know, we're talking about prevention and that sort of thing. We had a great question from Shane Vincent on Facebook. He said, what about prevention opportunities through nutrition and lifestyle choices? Can we change our lifestyle and what we eat, our nutrition, to prevent dementia or Alzheimer's? Who would like to take that? Diana, you want to start with that one?
Sure. Yeah, I think there's kind of a general motto that people use in terms of lifestyle factors that can help prevent Alzheimer's disease, and that's what's good for your heart is good for your brain. So exercise, a heart-healthy diet, and lots of fruits and vegetables, omega-3 fatty acids, fish, eating fish oil is maybe particularly beneficial for the brain. It's also really important to manage other diseases that you have, like diabetes or heart disease, high blood pressure, because those can increase your risk of Alzheimer's disease. In addition to physical exercise, also maintaining social engagement, mental exercise is also important. And there was actually a really interesting study that came out this week on sleep, that getting more sleep and having a higher quality of sleep can actually lower your risk of Alzheimer's disease, and actually decreases the amount of amyloid in your brain. We were talking about those amyloid PET scans earlier, that sleep could really be beneficial in so many ways. So I think that is important as well. So I think there is a lot that can do now. It's not going to be the whole picture, but you might be able to delay the disease and have an it.
Right. So some of those basic things that we know to lead a healthy lifestyle in terms of exercise, sleep, nutrition, these are all the basics that we need for all our aspects of our life. It's kind of back to basics in some ways. I know those are things I pay a great deal of attention to with Alzheimer's in my family, and that I put a lot of effort into with my dad. He has some sleep disorder kind of issues and I recently read a study about using lavender essential oils, and that seems to help him sleep a little better. So we're always looking for something, that's going to help all of us. Patricia, do you have anything else? I know, as again, someone who has Alzheimer's in their family, I'm sure this is really interesting to you.
Yeah, I know I have dementia in my family. I don't know whether it was Alzheimer's or not. So I think, I can only echo the healthy lifestyle things, and I think they become important not only, in prevention, but also in for caregivers as you support somebody who has dementia. And for the person with dementia, I see benefit in it as well. In my mom's case, she became disabled by other diseases, which often happens. You might have dementia, and you might also have other chronic conditions. But for friends of the family, I know that for their mom, being able to take her on daily walks and everything makes a great deal of difference in her perceived level of relaxation and her rest that she gets at night. So, even when you have dementia or you're caring for someone with dementia, these aspects remain important, as well as, there's some really key things about interacting with people with dementia that we probably won't have time to fully go over this time, but it's important for caregivers to have that perspective and training and education to help support them, because their health often is impacted by the caregiving function that they choose to take on.
Yeah, that's right. We see that at AARP a great deal with working with caregivers, that many times the caregiver sacrifices for the person they're caring for, and caring for those with dementia is an especially intense level of caregiving quite often. So we know that the caregivers need to take care of themselves as well. And on that note, we had a great question from Sarah on Google+. She says the caregivers of those with dementia often have tremendous information about their loved ones and their health. How can we better leverage their insights as part of the patient care team? This is a great question because it is a team approach, and many times the family caregivers are left out of that team. Patricia, you want to start with that one?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think Sarah's hit on a really important point, and I think that we need to look at ways to transform the way we deliver health care and support to people with dementia, because there is a team that helps them as they go forward. And there's also a need, I think, to identify the caregiver so that that person can help with the care of that person, because of the person with dementia. Because examples abound of people who manage quite well with early stage dementia, so maybe their healthcare provider may not fully understand that when they give them instructions about medication or different instructions about how to care for themselves, that they're not going to retain that it may become confusing to them at a level, a quicker pace than it would for someone without dementia. So I really think that we're going to have to look at ways to adapt our health care delivery systems to the tsunami of dementia that we project that we may have.
That's so true. Diana, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think just in terms of prevention, going back to that a little bit, I think there's a lot that we can learn about from these prevention strategies to inform new treatment development as well. So at the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation, learning from some of these prevention strategies that have been beneficial and trying to apply that to scientific research to develop new drug therapies. So I think stress was something that came up. There's actually compounds in development that can block the receptors that impact the negative effects of stress. And so I think it can inform from multiple directions, and hopefully we can combine some of these prevention approaches with new treatment development.
Very good point.
I mean, I'd add in there as well. I really loved what I heard Patricia saying in one anecdote about someone taking a walk with a Alzheimer's patient, and there's a couple things going on in that. One is the social engagement side, that's happening in that walk. And when we say exercise, we probably aren't talking about going out and running a mile. Just getting out and moving your bones and simple things. Doing all of these things is going to be very helpful, and is even as much as it may be combating Alzheimer's, which is what these trials are kind of leaning to over time. It may be part of what helps us combat some of the other things that come along with dementia, such as depression or some of the other diseases that are comorbid. That happen at the same time, elderly people. For instance, we work as well at Bright Focus Foundation in Alzheimer's disease, but we work in glaucoma and macular degeneration, which are eye diseases. And essentially, anything that you're doing to help your heart, is also working as a preventative for your brain and for your eye, which is sort of an extension of the central nervous system. So I really, take that as a holistic sort of approach, in terms of prevention. It's doing a lot of things for you in terms of your diet, in terms of your exercise level, social engagement, education, and we don't need to think of it as just the benefit it has for one disease. It may be other quality of life issues as well as other diseases.
Yeah, I love the walking anecdote as well. I make sure that my dad gets at least one walk every day, and last night we took a walk even after dark with our flashlight and his dog, and we sing while we walk, and that kind of stimulation is really, really helpful to him. And you also bring up something really important in terms of depression. And we had a question that Lynn Smith asked. Depression can often manifest like dementia. What do patients and caregivers need to know about the differences and possible connections between the two? We've already discussed the fact that sometimes depression comes along with dementia and can worsen the dementia symptoms. But I think she's also asking about a question about misdiagnoses, perhaps. Sometimes people think someone has dementia, but they've got other things going on. Depression is one of the things, thyroid disease, other things. Diana, you want to start with that question, and what's your view on that?
Sure. Well, I just think it's really important that, if there's any concern regarding memory issues or mood issues, to see your doctor and see a specialist. Um, there's a lot that can be, dementia is a symptom. So Alzheimer's disease is the most common cause of dementia, but there can be a lot of other causes of dementia, like you mentioned, vitamin B12 deficiency, vascular problems. And some of these causes are, you can actually do something about, and it can be an easy fix. My grandmother started exhibiting signs of dementia, and we were worried, and it turns out that she just needed to see the right geriatrician who gave her a shot of vitamin B12, and then she was 100% better. So it is important to, make sure that you're reaching out to your doctor, that you're getting the proper care. Yeah.
That's true. Go ahead, Guy.
I'd say absolutely. I'd include in that as a list of possibilities drug interactions. Most elderly people are not taking just one drug. You're taking probably 7, 8, 9 on average drugs at a time, and many of these can have cognitive effects that changing the dosage. It can alleviate those, but Diana's just absolutely spot on. Don't take our word for it. Don't take your neighbor's word for it. Get into a geriatrician, get into a medical care provider, and get the formal testing that not just that you need, but that you deserve. You don't want to be half-hearted about this.
Right.
These are really important decisions.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Patricia.
I was kind of saying, from my perspective with my mom, the first notion that the medical care system had for her was that she was depressed, because she had been a caregiver and she was a widow at the time that the dementia issue first came up. And she's also a social worker who had done psychiatric work in her social work practice. So we knew a lot about it, and as we escalated up, we said, okay, it's not depression, it's something else. So you have to follow through and figure out what it is for your particular loved one or person you're looking after.
Yes. It's all too often I think people make assumptions that if someone starts exhibiting some dementia symptoms, oh, they have Alzheimer's, and all too many people think there's nothing that can be done about it. If there is, which as we've been discussing, there are things that can be done. And sometimes there is a confusion over the fact that dementia is the broad category. Alzheimer's is one type of dementia, but there are other types that are maybe not as well known. Stacy Liu asked a question about that, saying, there's Lewy body dementia, frontal lobe dementia. There are different causes of dementia.
Yeah, I think, and they can, it's not an either or. I mean, we like to think of these things as we see them in the newspaper as being a slice of a pie chart of the different prevalences of different dementias. But I was at a grand rounds at one of the local hospitals a few weeks ago, and the presenter said we need not be thinking about this as a slice of the pie, but more a component of the stew of dementias. And so there may be aspects of vascular dementia or aspects of Lewy body dementia in the background of Alzheimer's disease. And I think it harkens to the complexity of these issues and how difficult it is to actually consider. Well, I mean, this is, after all, called a great challenge, right?
Yes. Guy, we just had a question from Jane who asked, is there a cogent relationship between high blood pressure and dementia? What do you think?
I think hypertension, it has been an established risk factor for several of the diseases I mentioned for a long time. One does need to differentiate it from things like from other vascular diseases or other problems that can be going on in the brain. But yeah, I believe that it is a very legitimate risk factor. But once again, it is a complicated story. I mean, there's studies of cholesterol that show that. My recollection is there's one of the nun studies where they looked at a convent of nuns who were eating. They had records of everything that they were eating through a many-year period. It's been a long time since I've seen that paper, but the observation was that at the end of the life, it looked like many of these nuns were subsisting on Big Macs, based on their cholesterol level, but may not have had dementia at the end of life. So it is, as a population, it is a risk factor, but we all live in a population, but we're all individuals, and we all have a different experience. And so just
Mm-hmm.
because you have hypertension doesn't mean you're going to get it.
Another question that we had that's related to the causes of dementia and Alzheimer's, Jake asked, is it true that sports injuries, particularly concussions, increase the risk of Alzheimer's? What kind of research is going on exploring that, and how can we prevent it? Diana, you want to start with that one?
Sure. Yeah, there is some evidence that head injuries increase the risk of Alzheimer's disease, as well as other types of neurodegenerative diseases. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy is, I think, the major disease that's been linked to head injury. And there's a lot that we're still have to learn about the mechanisms there. Whether it's inflammation, whether there's something about the injury process that releases more amyloid, or we still have a lot to learn and a lot more associations to make. But I think it is, I don't think anyone should be too alarmed if they have, one concussion as a child. There is a lot of regeneration capacity in the brain, but it is a risk factor.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Guy, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was actually curious about that question. Sort of in preparation for this talk, I dug up, started looking at some of the recent literature, and essentially, if you've had moderate concussions, the literature was saying that of greater than 30 minutes, that you may be elevating risk 2 times. Severe concussions that you might be out for 24 hours might be elevating up to 4 times the risk. But there's other data say it's not necessarily the severity, but the repetitiveness of these. So if you're having a long series, as if you're a boxer, of repeated concussions or repeated traumas over time, that's really at play. I mean, we also have to look at members of our military community. One of the studies I picked up that actually came out of, if I recall correctly, out of Banner Sun Health that you just mentioned, was an estimation that by the year 2020, which that's not very long from now, and this is a paper that came out this year, that we'd have another 400,000 incidences of dementias due to military exposures, and that's heartbreaking at a human level, but at a fiscal level for our nation, you're also looking at this paper projected about $6 to $8 billion in cost to care for these people. So I think that kind of harkens to one of the other great challenges around dementia is cost of care. These are diseases that, as our population ages, can truly cripple our economy. But getting back to the viewer's question, it does appear that traumatic brain injuries or concussions are leading to Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. Prevention strategies. I think there's a lot of interesting technologies coming out. We don't have any medical therapy that I know of. But even at TEDMED this year, actually, on the exhibit floor, you had technologies of people who were putting monitors, very very sophisticated and small profile monitors in the helmets of sports players to monitor the G-forces of any hits that they're taking, and basically flag the coach, flag the referees to say, if this person's taken this number of hits at this force, it's time to get them out of the game, for a while. So I think those are important contributions to prevention.
That's fascinating. I hadn't heard about that. Diana, do you have anything else to add to that in terms of sports injuries?
Yeah, I think there's also an interesting association with genetics. So one of the most common gene that's associated with risk for Alzheimer's disease is the apolipoprotein E gene, and if you have the 4 type, that increases your risk of Alzheimer's disease substantially. And there may also be a link there between people who have the ApoE4 gene and their risk of head injury influencing dementia. So there's a lot more to explore in terms of the genetic interaction, individual susceptibility to some of these risk factors.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Really fascinating.
Absolutely.
It's so we're all over. There's so many things that are part of this Alzheimer's discussion. And there's so much research that needs to be done. We had a question from Tamara saying that Alzheimer's research has been underfunded relative to the size of its threat. Do you think we're finally gaining some urgency and traction? Patricia, why don't you start with that one? Do you think that...
Yeah, I think we're gaining some traction. I mean, I'm an optimist at heart, but I don't think we've really looked at the full scope. I mean, there's so much that we need to do in terms of medical research, and then there's additional thought leadership that we are going to definitely need around how to care for people who are already in the process and already on the journey into dementia, and what we can do for them that mitigates their circumstances and improves their life outcomes, and make sure that those that care for them are taken care of as well. So I really still think there's a lot that has to go into figuring this out as on a sort of societal level.
Right. Go ahead, Diana.
Sorry, I was just going to say it's a little crazy when you look at the numbers. I think there's some data that came out that the incidence of death from Alzheimer's disease has gone up 60% from 2000 to 2012, whereas incidence of death from cardiovascular disease, cancer, heart disease has all gone down. So Alzheimer's is really the only chronic disease that's really increasing. And it really is a tsunami. It's aptly named. And when you look at how much funding government is providing, I think it's maybe $6 or $7 billion to cancer. I think around $3 billion to HIV/AIDS, and it's about $400 or $500 million for Alzheimer's disease. And so, it's the funding that we're getting to Alzheimer's disease just is matching the proportion of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's incredibly important part of the discussion. The philanthropic community that many of us participate in, we cannot match what is possible when our government really takes interest in funding this disease. And you look at Diane brought up HIV/AIDS. It's a terrible disease, but our government really took a stand and said we're going to put nearly $2 billion a year into this disease, and it has been absolutely transformative for the types of tools that are available to all diseases. So if we're talking about putting this type of money into the neurosciences, we can expect that this is not a single disease issue of Alzheimer's disease or dementia. We are going to see the benefits across the board in human health. And I think that's a really important point to drive home, is that we aren't robbing from Peter to pay Paul, but we are looking at different fields that could really transform how we care for human beings.
Yeah, because the HIV/AIDS phenomena and how we've addressed that in this country was both medical and social, and involved communication support, it involved community support, and really looking at holistically how we had to address that issue. And I think that's the same thing we have to do here.
And let's look at HIV dementia. HIV dementia, is in some ways there can be ties between all of these diseases. So in the U.S., very few people, it's about 2 to 3% develop dementia that have HIV, but on the world stage, it's about 30%, and it seems to be. There was a paper out maybe about a year ago that suggested it was linked through a particular growth factor called BDNF that says that we can be studying all these diseases at one time and potentially having therapies that matter for many of these diseases.
Mm-hmm. I think it seems that there are different components of this dementia discussion. One is the prevention aspects, then we have the treatment, and how do we best support people who are living with dementia. We certainly want to prevent dementia, we want to cure it, we want to find all those things, but we're going to have increasingly, millions of people living with dementia. We had a great question from a Twitter person who asked, what are the best environments to support people who are living with dementia? I know I've chosen to care for my dad at home, and it's a day-to-day thing when you're caring for someone with dementia. It may change, but right now I feel the best environment for him. but there are other environments. There's also adult daycare centers. There's the greenhouses. There's nursing facilities. There's a lot of different ways to address this. Patricia, why don't you take that question, and what do you think in terms of the best environments to support people living with dementia?
Sure. I mean, my most heartfelt response to that is like you need a loving environment, because that just because you lose part of a person's personality or who you think they were through dementia, there's still a way to connect with that person and still love and care that they need. So they need a loving environment. My mom was at home for a good period of time, and she end of her life was in a nursing home, but it was a loving environment. And I think that there's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration when you're thinking about the place to put that individual, because it's a case-by-case basis that what will be best for a person and what will be best for a family and what will be best for a caregiver that has to mind. But whatever, if you do end up in my situation where your parent goes into a nursing home, which my mother did, I was still with her every weekend for the duration of her disease, and I was still making important contributions to her care and to everybody understanding that she was not in a warehouse, she was in a new home, and that I expected loving care for her.
You make such a good point, and I always say that when you have someone who is a loved one living in a facility, I say you got to be there every day, because
Right.
you're gonna affect that care for them.
And I hired additional caregivers for my mother because I couldn't be there every day because I lived a couple of hours away, and then I was there every weekend. And that brings up the economic costs of caring for people with dementia and the importance of what will of the burden it can become on a family in terms of the cost of what's happening.
Yes, it can be highly affect a caregiver's financial situation. I can certainly attest to that myself. And you want the best for your loved one. I hire a live-in caregiver who's with my parents when I'm working. But everyone can't do that, and it's
Right.
really a challenge. And I think we need more volunteers who are trained to work with people with dementia, who actually can address the fact that as you say, that person is still that person. They're still there. And just because dementia has changed the way their behavior and the way they communicate and a lot of things about them, they're still a whole person, and they still have a history, and they still have many things you can connect around. I'm originally a music therapist, and of course music is a wonderful tool with dementia, and that's why we sing when my dad and I go for walks. Guy, do you have anything to add about living environments for those with dementia?
No, I don't have the same personal experience with dementia that you all do, and what I've gleaned from my capacity here at my organization and talking with caregivers and reading literature really reflects the personal choice and finding the place that's right and finding it with love, as Patricia suggested. So I don't think I could contribute anything certainly more eloquently than either of you have already said.
Diana, anything to add there?
No, I don't have anything. I think you guys both summed it up beautifully, and we do need more support for sure for caregivers. It's a very challenging task, and I can't even imagine. So it's very important.
Yeah. If I may, I just want to add the website address for the AARP Caregiving Resource Center. That's just aarp.org/caregiving. It's a great resource for caregivers. We had a question about managing people's anxiety about having Alzheimer's. Tuck asked this on Google+. I think it's a really interesting question, and I'm not really sure if he's pointing towards the person who has dementia or the family members or caregivers. Either way, Patricia, what do you think about that?
I do remember and acknowledge that there can be a lot of anxiety for the person who's experiencing dementia, because at least for my mother, there was a period of time when she knew that something was not right or something was changing in her cognitive abilities, and she was very sensitive about it because she was a highly accomplished woman. And so I had to manage that as her caregiver while still being her caregiver. So, there were subtleties to responding to people so that she still looked like she was making a response. When if a waiter comes up and she's like, and we had discussed what she wanted to eat, and she couldn't, articulate to that person. I have to say, didn't you say you'd like to have the salmon or whatever, and there's different ways that people want to maintain who they are as long as they can. So I think that's important. And I also think there's a definite anxiety around what to do when you're caregiving and what's right, because the dementia changes over time with the person that you're caring for. So what worked, and you might all of a sudden kind of get relaxed and say, well, this is working. I know how to take care of mom or dad. And then mom or dad does something new or different while they're in your care, and you're like, oh no, now I've got to figure out, how to have someone in the house all the time with mom or dad, because it's not a mild cognitive impairment. It's somebody who is at risk of, turning on a stove or, walking out of a house or something like that. So I think there's anxiety, and I think one way to mitigate that anxiety is to make sure that we have open dialogues and supports for people who are caregivers, and that we have respect for people who have dementia. So that's
absolutely, and treating it with that. I know we're dealing this right now with my dad, and that he will ask for my mom, and we have to tell him, mom has passed, and he after a week or so, he would realize that he had been told that, but he'd forgotten, and then he would be very upset with himself for having forgotten it. And that's really hard. It's heartbreaking anyway for us, but to see him have the anxiety about the fact that he knows he's not remembering, and it's something that a phase that is often gone through with those with dementia. And we reassure him and say, of course this is a difficult thing, and of course you're going to have trouble. I can't even believe it. Of course you are having trouble remembering it. And the truth is that sometimes diversion is the best tactic when someone is at that stage in Alzheimer's where they're aware they're not remembering and there's a lot of anxiety around it. But later on, in later stages, often that anxiety does go away.
It does, and I think we also, as caregivers or people interacting with dementia, have to give ourselves the question of, when does reality matter? And whose reality matters? So there was a point where I would go with my mother and visit with her every weekend, and she would say to me, oh, I just talked to someone who may have been deceased, and I had a really good conversation with them, and they're doing well. And I could have spent a lot of time saying, but that's not the case.
Right.
But I said, oh, that's really great. I'm glad that they're doing well, and move on. So I mean, there's lots of ways that you have to learn how to address, and remember that as much as you want that person to be in your reality, sometimes that's not possible for them, and some of the kindness thing you can do for them, if it's not a danger to them or hurting anything, is to let them see a purple cow across the room if they see a purple cow across the room, or let them think that they visited with someone that they care about if that's who they want to be with.
Right. Folks who are interested in this topic might want to look up Naomi Feil and her validation therapy research and work and writing, because I found that's something that you validate what the person is feeling and move on, and that's something that can be very helpful. We have an interesting question come in on Twitter. Why is Alzheimer's considered a mental illness by the APA? This person says they were actually denied collecting trip cancellation insurance because of this classification. Isn't it more than that? And which is such an interesting question, because it can be approached as a mental illness, but it's also a health issue. Guy, you want to start with that one?
Wow, I don't know where to begin with that, to be perfectly honest. That's a really, it gets into so many areas, but it is. Alzheimer's isn't just in your head, right? I mean, it is an organic, it is an organic problem. It is not part of natural aging. We can age, and we can age without Alzheimer's disease. We can age healthily. It is a destruction of the tissue that's happening in the brain. It's not a chemical imbalance. It is an active degradation of your brain. And so I think the viewer or the caller has a really strong point of questioning, what do we actually call this? Do we call this an injury to the body, or do we call it a mental health issue? It sounds like perhaps it's the business of businesses to protect their assets. So they're going to do what they can, to work within whatever rules are established. But I mean, I really want to validate that question as being particularly eye-opening.
Yes, and it's interesting to me that why they wouldn't count any mental illness as something in that kind of realm is sort of interesting. Diana, anything to add to that?
I think Guy did a great job summing that up. Alzheimer's really is a neurodegenerative disease. If you take a brain of somebody, who's died from Alzheimer's versus a normal brain, I mean, it's shocking just the amount of tissue that's lost in the disease, the degeneration that occurs. And you can see that in some MRI brain imaging in the advanced stages of the disease and even earlier on in the disease. So these are real structural changes that you can see happening in the brain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's an interesting approach to that. We have another question here that I love from Facebook, and the question is, can communities do things to promote mobility and care for those with dementia? Our town is planning a new assisted living right in the center of town, which seems good on many levels. I think this is a really interesting question because we're looking at livable communities. I know this is a big issue at ARP. Many of us are trying to, again, it's sort of like that living environment kind of question. But this is a bigger issue because many people think once you're diagnosed with dementia, well, you can't go anywhere, you can't do anything. And I'm here to tell you that my dad goes everywhere with me and enjoys going and getting out and going places and taking walks. One example is I have often taken my parents to the mall because it's hot in the summertime in Arizona and go there to walk because of two things. One, they have valet parking and they would help me get the wheelchair out of the car and all of that. Two, they have family bathrooms. And that's something my dad needs me a little help in the bathroom, and I can easily go in there with him instead of kicking a bunch of men out of the men's room when I take him. So these kind of community and livable community issues with dementia I think are really important. Patricia, what do you think about that? I think you need to unmute your microphone, Patricia.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Uh-huh.
I absolutely, and I did lose the connectivity for a second, so I apologize, but I understand we're talking about community living and supports again, and having the right kinds of supports, and not thinking that anyone's going to just be put away because they have dementia. And I think we do really have to think about, holistically how we are structuring our society so that we can make sure that everybody is comfortable and that there are things like that available. I know for my mom, who turned 90 April 5th of this year, she was out for her birthday on a champagne brunch. She died 3 weeks later, but she was out on her birthday and she was dressed up and she was beautiful, and she went to a club meeting the month before that because the voices were familiar and the activity was great. So I don't think you take people out of action, you help the environments get ready for the people.
I couldn't agree with you more. My dad just had his 90th birthday, and we went out for dinner, and my mom was there, and the very next morning she couldn't get out of bed, and she died later that week. But I feel good about that I have them out and interacting on a regular basis. Guy, did you have something to add to this?
Well, I think in terms of a dementia-capable workforce, there's some fairly well-known stats that only about 1% of our nurses, physicians assistants, pharmacists, doctors are certified in geriatrics, but they're seeing about 26% of the patients. I mean, we clearly have an imbalance there in terms of what we're actually capable of relative to what the demand is. And I think that's one place that communities, especially for the academic communities that hold medical schools or medical training, can do, is to provide the continuing medical education credits, or provide just the necessary training, even if it's not CMEs, to help make us a better capable of addressing this. I wanted to chime in earlier on. We were talking about getting Alzheimer's patients or dementia patients out into the public. We have a woman at our church who just church has been such a tremendous part of her life for so many years that it's sort of the one area of her life where she continues to be very very eloquent, and she offers the most wonderful prayers in our in our church, all in a background of very advanced Alzheimer's disease. And I think as a nation, we have a lot of difficulty facing aging, and there is a temptation to hide the problems with aging. And so I really celebrate those people who get out in the front. If we're going to conquer this disease, it does require an Alzheimer's movement, and it does require acknowledging these people that have the disease and sharing their stories. So I really thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you, Guy, for saying that. And that is why, as I said, my parents were educators, and we discussed many years ago, and that's why I do my caregiving so publicly and share our experiences in my blog. And my dad says grace every night, and that's one of the things he can almost always completely gets all the words, and it's a very special time for us.
Absolutely.
Well, I hate to say this, but we're starting to come to a close because it's been such a great discussion. Through the Great Challenges Discussion Center around issues that can't be solved with a one-shot cure, we can certainly imagine smaller, less magical steps that maybe make a very significant impact in the spaces that we're talking about. And with the complexity around this topic, where are some of the best places to start focusing our attention? I want to ask each of you this, what are some of the things we can do to see an improvement in the short term in order to build momentum for the future around prevention, research, possible cures, treatments, and caring for those who have dementia? I think, for me, as a person who has a family member who has dementia, and my grandmother also had it, I look a lot at the prevention aspects of it, and I'm really pleased to see more effort going in that direction. Patricia, what do you think?
I agree with everything you say. I couldn't agree more. And I would also say that I think we need to look and give some thought to how we're going to shift our approach in the coming years to patient and personal care for people with dementia and their caregivers. So I think we really have to put more thought into that.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And Guy, what would you say?
So I'd say that every single one of us, no matter what country we're listening to this TEDMED broadcast in, we have elected representatives that we need to be talking to. Your voice really will matter. If you take the time to write that letter, to call in and express your concerns. In the U.S., we have the National Alzheimer's Project Act, which has a goal of eliminating, curing Alzheimer's disease by 2025. Get on the phone and get in support of these. Even if you're looking at state level government, community level government, even if you're talking about your homeowners association, what we're talking about here is like how do we make our world better for an aging population? And at any level of those governments, your voice can matter. And so I really encourage everybody to pick up the phone.
That's great. Thank you, Guy. And Diana?
Yeah, I guess to end on a hopeful note regarding treatments, if we can delay Alzheimer's disease by just 5 years, we can cut the incidence in half. And so I think that's realistic. I think we have the tools in place now with biomarkers and brain imaging tests like we talked about earlier. And we have a lot of new treatments that are coming through the pipeline. And I think there's a lot of hope there that we can diagnose people early and slow the disease progression and prevent people from actually getting dementia.
I think that's such an important point, Diana. Anyone who suspects that someone they love may have dementia or themselves, it's not something anymore that you say, well, there's nothing that can be done about it. Why should I go to a doctor? There are ways to delay and to slow down the progression, and it's important to get on that. Well, I'm sorry, but it looks like our time is up. This is clearly a topic that impacts so many people and is very important in society as well as to all of us individually. Don't hesitate to jump on the community pages to ask your questions, and if we didn't have time to get to your question today, you can also continue joining us with the Twitter hashtag #GreatChallenges, and we welcome everyone's input. That's the whole point of this, this is a dialogue, and by continuing this dialogue, we'll get the momentum going. I've been asked to remind you that the next Google Hangout is on the impacts of sleep deprivation, something I'm very familiar with as a caregiver, which will be on Thursday, November 7th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Thank you to everybody at TEDMED. You guys are fabulous. The team members and all of the guests, Diana, Guy, Patricia, who participated today. Thank you again to Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, the sponsor of the Great Challenges program. And it's just been a great pleasure to be with you today. So goodbye, everyone. Take care.